Hi, my name is Mare. I'm a writer, and I put out a video talking about how to write the midpoint of a novel and the functions of the midpoint. That video is all of the theory behind midpoints that I've gathered from all of these different writing craft resources that I've read. So I've synthesized that for you, and it's in that video. But what I want to do in this video is go into a deep dive of Fourth Wing and the fact that it doesn't have a midpoint and why that is, and also Iron Flame and why it does have a midpoint and why it does, and why that all makes so much sense with the actual construction of the plot. Before we jump in, I want to recap the theory video that I put out last week really shortly, so go there for more detail. Let me just tell you the few things that a midpoint does. A midpoint is a turning point halfway through the story, information that's uncovered, a choice somebody makes that turns the story in a slightly different direction, and that direction includes these things. Number one, it ramps up the danger. And this is because bad guys are closing in. And this is what Save the Cat calls the section after the midpoint. And this is basically saying that if you have a villain or an antagonist or a conflict, it's going to close in on the hero. And the third thing that it's going to do is it's going to up the stakes. The thing that they are trying to achieve, their goal, that is going to be even more in danger, and it's going to be more important that they achieve it. And it can also raise the stakes to a global level where instead of just what the hero cares about is at stake, now the world is at stake or many more people are in danger. And fourth, all of these factors force the hero to become proactive where they were just reactionary before. And so usually the hero makes a plan and attempts to achieve the goal. So that's midpoint in a nutshell. Let's talk about Fourth Wing. Spoiler alerts for all of this. I'm going to need to talk about the finale for Fourth Wing and also the midpoint of Iron Flame. So Fourth Wing, the first book, does not have a midpoint that I can see. I tried so hard. I went through this whole reread and I was like, where is this midpoint? I will find it if it's the last thing I do. I scoured for it. So there are a couple moments that poses midpoints that I was like half convinced they were midpoints, but they actually don't serve the central role of a midpoint. So I was like, okay, they're not. The things that come to mind are Threshing when she, gets her dragons. That's a huge turning point, right? Like it changes how she interacts in school. It can almost be seen as like before then is fun and games. After that, things maybe get a little serious, but not really. There's also a turning point with Xaden about 50% of the way through the book, and I was like, oh, is this the midpoint? But I'm convinced that this is not a romance main plot book. Like it's a fantasy action plot. There's a lot of evidence for that based on the finale. The romance is a super heavy element, but it's not the main plot. So basically a change in the romance is not a midpoint because it's not a change in the overarching plot of the book. It's a subplot, and so a change in the subplot can propel the character, can do a lot, but if the overall plot, the action plot, doesn't change at all, then it's not a midpoint. And so the change that happens is he saves her from people trying to kill her in the middle of the night, and it kind of turns their relationship. They start to, really have to work together, and then he starts training her. Their relationship getting closer doesn't, make her need to be proactive. It doesn't increase the danger. It does nothing for the stakes. Like, it doesn't change anything, but it's fun. It changes the romance, and that's great. So anyway, those are not midpoints. Basically, I came to the conclusion that this book doesn't have a midpoint, which is bizarre to me. That a book like this exciting, this famous, this gobbled up by readers doesn't have a midpoint. So I was like, okay, what the heck is going on? The basic idea here is that this book couldn't have a midpoint because the actual conflict is hidden until the very end. At the finale, there's this massive surprise of here's the real conflict that you will have to deal with at the finale. This is foreshadowed, it's set up. The foundations for it are well laid throughout the book, but basically because Violet didn't know about this overall conflict, she couldn't do anything about it. The villain couldn't close in because she wasn't aware of it. She couldn't become proactive about a problem she doesn't know about, so she can't do that. The stakes can't get higher because the reader and Violet don't know that anything is at stake, right? This finale, turns out to be something way bigger than just her and her problems, right? Like there's actual people she needs to save at the end, but that's not introduced at the midpoint. Those literary devices are basically saved for right before the finale. And so the middle of the book is actually quite monotonous because there's no turning point. There is just here's one more thing she has to overcome in school. Here's one more challenge. She overcomes it. And then, there's another challenge. There's constant threat of death, but the threat of death never escalates until we bring in this idea of other people will be hurt. This unique structure of basically having the main conflict be a surprise rather than having it be something that the character is aware of throughout the entire book is one of the only ways that I've seen a book just pull off not having a midpoint. And the way that the author compensates for this is by really tight tension and pacing. And like I said, there's like kind of these mini hills of problem, overcome it, problem, overcome it. You know, there's consequences from those things, but there's this constant rising and falling of these mini tension beats. And that allows for an engaging story, even without a midpoint, even without these turning points. And it works. The only reason I think that you should not have a midpoint is if you're going to do all of the things that Fourth Wing does. Number one, master tension and pacing, have a huge main conflict that has to be saved for the end of the book. Like, it would ruin things if you spoiled it beforehand. And if you have a premise that is interesting enough to carry the entire book without a turning point, without a focus in this the whole entire second half on the main conflict. Fourth Wing has that, right? People are obsessed with Dragon School. You know, it shows. And so that carries the entire book until the finale. And so it's pretty impressive that this book is so popular without a midpoint. I don't know. I'm impressed. But I also, as I was reading through the book, I was like, this is really quite monotonous. It's like the same type of conflict over and over and over and over, because there is no middle twist. There's no elevation in the conflict until the end. And so I love a book where there's that midpoint elevation of conflict. So let's talk about Iron Flame, because it has that. Again, spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. I will be dropping spoilers. So if you haven't read it, you know, do that. Or if you don't care, let's go. Okay, Iron Flame does have a midpoint. It has a very, very strong midpoint because there's a massive shift in the whole story, the whole action plot from before to after. The midpoint is when she gets the whole school to rise up against the administration and leave. That's like just very, very different, because the first half of the book is basically doing Fourth Wing over again, but second year, all the same things over again. There's a couple new things, like some new classes, some new, you know, long distance relationship tension. And then there's this midpoint. All that rising tension from the first half gets broken open. The stakes are high. The game is changed. And then Violet needs to be proactive because she's just like put all these people in danger. And then after that midpoint, she gets to refocus on the goal, this huge problem. We need to ally with these people and fix it. And also, she has her own personal goal with the wards of figuring that out. And that's more of a mystery plot that she's doing there. It creates new goals. It forces her to be much more proactive because she like starts a student revolt, basically. It raises the stakes. It does all the things that a midpoint should do. For such a ginormous book, like thick, thick book, it needs a midpoint. Both of these books could have used a midpoint, but I understand for Fourth Wing. But if Iron Flame had not had a midpoint, it wouldn't have made any sense, because the conflict's already out in the open. We know about it. Violet knows about it. So there should be a midpoint, because you can add new knowledge about that conflict and then you can change the game. And that is exactly what this book did. And it's exactly what it should have done in order to keep a reader's interest. And just because any book should have a midpoint. Okay, that's the Fourth Wing discussion on midpoints. It's just so exciting as a reader to get to the midpoint and to see that we're still in the same story, but almost the rules are different. And then we want to see the after effects of that in this danger and this tension. And we want to be hooked. And so this midpoint is just such a good way to do that. So when you're reading, see if the book that you're reading has a midpoint, and if that midpoint is achieving all of these things. And if not, is it doing it in a skillful way that's purposeful, like with Fourth Wing? Or is it actually lacking something? Like, can you pick out where actually it could have used to have the bad guys close in more that would have actually made a better second half? I love thinking these things through in all of the books that I'm reading and evaluating these kinds of things. And if a book has a bad midpoint, or the midpoint doesn't do what it's supposed to, the book falls flat for me. I hope this helped. Subscribe and give this video a like if you enjoyed it and want to see more like it. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.